Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Steve Johnson, and I want to welcome you today to our short live stream on the topic of what is REBT. I designed it primarily for those of you who have not been exposed to the model, but even if you have been, I have some time at the very end of the short presentation part of this live stream for you to ask questions and answers and then make comments. So go to the comments section if you have any questions at any point. Type those in, and then when I'm finished with the early presentation part of it, then I'll go there and take them in order. I've already had some people submit some questions, so I will take them if I don't see any in the comment section. So let's just jump right into this. I want to go to the origins of REBT as developed by Dr. Albert Ellis. I had the pleasure way years ago to be mentored by Dr. Ellis at the famous Albert Ellis Institute. And so it was really nice to be able to learn directly from Albert Ellis. So I wanted to say something about the origin of this without going into great depth. Albert was trained in psychoanalytic theory, as generally every was at that point in history, but he was getting a little frustrated and then had this epiphany from several different places, one by the clients he was working with, and then others by his reading of Stoicism as presented by Epictetus in the Enchiridion. And Epictetus said that we are not disturbed by the events that we encounter, but by the meaning we give to those events. And that was like an epiphany for Albert Ellis. The other stream of information to Albert that was really fundamental in his conceptualization of the model was in his reading of Karen Horney, who talked about the tyranny of the should. And we will see in a few minutes how fundamental that is to the REBT model that Dr. Ellis created. I want to begin today with the ABC model. It's quite simple. Albert always wanted his model to be pedagogically friendly, and the ABC model is that. The A stands for an activating event or critical activating event. That means something that happens in the environment, and sometimes it's even within us, that triggers a response initially, right? And so the A is the activating event. The B is really about cognition. And there are two kinds of cognitions that are really important as described by Albert Ellis. One is an inference. That's a cognition or a thought that attributes meaning to that activating event. What does it mean to the individual who's going through it? And the meaning is attributed to the individual. That differs from individual to individual. We put 10 people in a room going through the same situation, and they may be interpreting it differently. So thus that impacts them differently. And then the other kind of cognition is belief. Whereas the inference attributes meaning to the situation, the belief evaluates the situation. And we'll get to what that means in a few minutes. But if you just remember, the inference attributes meaning, the belief evaluates it. Those are two different kinds of cognitions, and that difference makes a lot of sense. Then the C is what we call the consequences, and those could be emotions, behaviors, and even physiological responses within our body. And I'll go into each of those in a little detail. But the thing that often is missed by some people when they study REBT is that the A, the B, and the C, the activating event, the beliefs about the activating event, and the consequences of those beliefs, excuse me, are all interconnected. And that is very, very important because it gives us a lot of options when we go to help treat clients. They're interconnected. Um, the second kind of topic that I want to really look at is how do those beliefs, particularly the evaluations, but also the inferences, but how do those beliefs influence emotions and behavioral reactions? Here is what Albert would call the BC connection. Many models, and especially that psychodynamic model that Albert learned on, and the psychodynamic model that I started learning psychotherapy with, looks at the influence of the activating event or the situation, sometimes going way back to the early parent-child relationship, right? And they would say that that activating event is what is the immediate cause of the emotions, behaviors, etc. Um, Albert moved away from that. We are not saying in REBT that the activating event or the past situations that a child goes through or the subsequent situations or events that we go through don't impact us, but it's not a contiguous relationship. It is the beliefs that we have about those situations that tend to cause our emotions, largely cause our emotions, behaviors, etc., which is actually great news, because sometimes we cannot change the past, and certainly we cannot change our early childhood or anything like that. That's given. That's just the way it is. But we can change the meaning that we attribute to the situation, and we can change the evaluations that we make of situations. So if the A causes the C, or the situation causes our emotions and behaviors, we really are kind of stuck. We probably need to move to a perfect island, but the trouble is, as soon as we arrive there, it's not perfect anymore, because we still have those thoughts, those beliefs, those inferences and beliefs. And so we focus on the BC connection, because there we can do some work with those beliefs to help change dysfunctional emotions and behaviors to more functional ones, so that clients better attain their desired life goals, and we reduce the symptoms there. Although specifically, the goal of REBT is not to reduce symptoms, but to change them so that they are helpful. Okay, so let's just sum up that again. We have two kinds of beliefs: inferences that attribute meaning to the situations that we go through in life, and beliefs that are evaluations of those events. Now, if we zero in on the beliefs, Albert initially talked about rational beliefs and irrational beliefs. And today, some people still use that. I tend to use helpful beliefs and unhelpful beliefs. They mean the same thing, but the connotation is a bit different. So some of those beliefs will be helpful or rational, and some will be unhelpful or irrational. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us. All humans have a combination of helpful and unhelpful, or rational or irrational beliefs. So let's look at some of those. Okay. Um, Typical kind of unhelpful beliefs as found within REBT. Now, if you go to CBT, they have a different list of beliefs there. It's a bit longer. In REBT, the list is a bit shorter. They're not in contradiction with each other. They're just uh, uh, attribution of those beliefs that are just somewhat different. Within REBT, we say that there are four types of unhelpful beliefs, and then there are corollaries to those that are more helpful. So let's just briefly go through those. The core unhelpful belief or irrational belief would be demandingness. In English, those are typically found in statements that contain should, ought, must, have to, and need. Now, we're not word policemen or police officers, But so we don't jump on those words. But if the person uses those words, should, ought, must, have to, um, need, in a way that is kind of demanding in nature, then we would call that demandingness, which is the core dysfunctional belief. Albert said that all of the other unhelpful beliefs, dysfunctional beliefs, irrational beliefs, are derivatives of those. They're combined with demandingness. One of those derivatives, the second kind of unhelpful belief, would be awfulizing, or what in CBT they would call catastrophizing, mean the same thing. And so that's when we believe this is terrible, this is horrible, this is awful, those kinds of things. And we mean it. I mean, sometimes we say those words and we don't really mean them in that way. Awful in the sense of negate all meaning, purpose, and potential happiness in life. Sometimes if we're going on the subway in New York and it's rained and we're getting our shoes wet and our socks wet, we make, oh, this is terrible. It doesn't mean that it is utterly catastrophic, right? But when we believe that it is awful, then we tend to have a more unhelpful, dysfunctional kind of emotion or behavior. The other one, which is very, very common, is what we call frustration intolerance. We used to call it low frustration intolerance, and now we call it frustration intolerance because there are certain situations when it's not that we have low frustration tolerance, but the situation is really, really difficult and we may need more frustration tolerance than we normally would. Let's say we have a really difficult situation that is ongoing, right? We have a condition that requires a lot of work. We have a child that has some special needs. These parents don't have low frustration. They just need more frustration tolerance because it's a more difficult situation. Okay. Frustration intolerance just typically means this is too much, this is overwhelming, those kinds of things. And that's very, very common. We see that often with anxiety. Albert says about 99% of individuals with anxiety have that frustration intolerance. Again, it does not mean that the person is not normal. Normal people have demandingness and awfulizing or catastrophizing and frustration intolerance. And then the last one in that category is what we would call global negative rating. And it's global negative rating of what? Global negative rating of the self. I am a failure. I'm no good. I'm evil. All of those kinds of things. Or global negative rating of not myself, but of other people. Or global negative rating of life and the world. And Wendy Dryden adds another category called global negative rating of our thoughts. If we go, oh my gosh, I'm thinking it's absolutely crazy, this is terrible, then we're evaluating that in a negative way itself. Now, those are categories of what we would call the normal but unhelpful, irrational kind of beliefs. Why? Because when we believe those, we tend to have deeply disturbed kind of emotions, but more importantly, those kinds of beliefs actually inhibit us in attaining our desired life goals. Right? If we beat up on the self, we tend not to be motivated to go after goals that are really important. So these these categories of unhelpful beliefs impede our attainment of desired life goals. What are the rational alternatives to those? Because that's what we want to work with clients to help them move from those unhelpful beliefs to more helpful ones. Well, in place of demandingness, we would like some preferential kinds of beliefs. That would mean that I wish, I want, I hope, I desire. It doesn't mean that it's weak. We could strongly wish, strongly desire something. So it's not the intensity of the emotion that makes it helpful or unhelpful. It is the qualitative difference between the two. We can very strongly prefer something, but that's different than demanding it, okay? If we prefer something and it doesn't occur, then we tend not to disturb ourselves as much as if we think it ought to be or it should be the way that we want it. Okay. So in the place of demandingness, we try to help clients move toward preferential language: desire, wish, want, hope. Instead of awfulizing or catastrophizing, we want to help clients, even ourselves, to recognize the badness of a situation, but without exaggerating. That we go, yep, it's bad, but it doesn't negate all meaning, purpose, and potential happiness in my life. It's just bad. Okay. Frustration intolerance. Remember, frustration intolerance means I can't stand this. This is too much. And the alternative, the helpful alternative to that is, yep, this is difficult. I wish I weren't going through this. This is difficult, but I can get through it. It's not going to kill me. Okay. I will get through it. I won't like it. And then global negative rating, what we want to do with global negative rating of self, others, life, world, or even Wendy Dryden's cognitions would be uh, unconditional acceptance. And I'm going to go back to that notion of unconditional acceptance because it's often greatly, greatly misunderstood. So global negative rating of the self, we've already seen it. Instead of that, we unconditionally accept ourselves. It doesn't mean we like all of our behaviors. We don't like our thoughts, all of them. We're not really fond of the emotions that we have, but largely behaviors. But we accept that is the way I am acting right now. Global negative rating of the other, same thing. Is that we unconditionally accept the other. We unconditionally accept the self. We may not like everything about the self. We unconditionally accept the other. We may not like everything about them, right? In terms of behaviors, etc. Unconditionally accept life. There are some negative things in life, as we all know, if we're sensitive enough and watch television or listen to YouTube, etc. Then we realize that life has its challenges. The world has its challenges. Okay, but we unconditionally accept that this is the way it is right now. Doesn't mean that I don't want to change it. Doesn't mean that I'm gonna lobby hard, right, to try to change it and do whatever I need to do, protest, whatever. But we begin by acknowledging and accepting the way it is right now, rather than deeply disturb ourselves about it and then not be able to do anything about it whatsoever. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let me go to some practical kinds of things that we do in REBT to try to change this. And one, if you take a training in REBT, and one of the best trainings that you'll find in REBT is to go to the Albert Ellis Institute, and they have the primary, the advanced, etc., which you can go into greater and greater depth within it. Excellent, excellent training. So if you ever have the chance, look into it. But one of the most common ways, the practical ways that we try to change those beliefs so that we better have our behaviors and our emotions are more helpful and help us to attain our desired life goals is what we call cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring means you start with the beliefs and inferences as they are right now that are not being really helpful, again, normal, but not helpful. And then we go through a process so that we move them toward those more helpful beliefs as I've described earlier. And so how do we do this? We look at the belief or the beliefs that the client is holding or that I'm holding, and then we challenge those beliefs. Sometimes we use the word dispute, and we dispute them using different kinds of challenges. How is holding that belief helpful for you? Where's the evidence that that belief is helpful or true? How logical is that belief, right? Or what would you do? What would you say to a friend who was holding the belief that was getting in the way of them attaining desired life goals, right? So we have different styles of challenging those beliefs. And over time, we will learn which one tends to work for the best for our clients, okay? And then we replace those dysfunctional beliefs after we've challenged them and convinced ourselves that they're not helpful. We then replace them. And we've already talked about the replacement. We would replace the demandingness with more preferential or global negative rating of self, others, life, and world with unconditional acceptance of those elements in our cognitive world, right? In our emotional world. So that is a really powerful way. And learning how to do that and helping clients do that can be wonderfully liberating for them. Another one that we often use is acting as if. This was talked about by psychologists way back in the 1800s, and we've kind of refined that. And so let's say that we act as if we weren't anxious right now. If you've learned solution focused therapy, they have the miracle question. This is just a different way to go about addressing that. Excuse me. Um, Act as if you are confident. Act as if you were not overwhelmed with something right then, right? Act into the world in a different way. Why why might that work? Because not only can we change emotions and behaviors by cognitive restructuring, we can use behavioral techniques like act as if, right? Because the beliefs, emotions, and behaviors are and cognitions are all interconnected, and we can change the beliefs, or we can work on changing the behaviors, or work on changing the emotions, and that will cause changes in the other aspects. Okay, the other one is act into the person that you want to be. So that's pretty much the same thing. We can act as if we had a more helpful emotion, right? Or we could act into the person that we want to be. What kind of qualities would we have? Another one that is really helpful is what we call rational emotive imagery. By the way, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the techniques that we have to help individuals better attain their desired life goals and not feel so emotionally disturbed or behaviorally disturbed. Rational emotive imagery is just a two-part process. Let's say we have an activating event that we disturbed ourselves about. Well, we would divide this into two parts. Part one, we would visualize that event, and then we would try to get in touch with the emotion, the dysfunctional emotion that we had within that event. As soon as we get in touch with that, then we stop the visualization, calm down, do what we need to calm down. And then we would say, part two, visualize the very same event, but this time replace the dysfunctional emotion with the functional alternative. So, for example, let's say I'm feeling in the first situation when I was visualizing that event that happened, I was really trying to get in touch with the anxiety that I experienced. When I felt that anxiety, then we stopped. In the second visualization, I visualized the very same thing, but this time I try to make myself feel concerned, but not really anxious. These are qualitatively different because the beliefs would be different for anxiety than they would concern. Once we get in touch with that concern, then we stop. And then we sit and think, what change did I have to make within myself so that I was able to move from anxiety to concern? Why this is really helpful is not only do we learn to make that shift, but we overcome a lot of clients have the belief that I have no control over my emotion. Emotions just happen to me. And so by doing this rational emotive imagery, we realize we have more control over our emotions than we actually realize. And again, that can be very liberating to realize I can do something about dysfunctional emotions and move toward more functional emotions and behaviors. And then one that Albert Ellis made famous was the shame attack. This is often great for someone who experiences a lot of shame, anxiety, that kind of thing. And so what we would do is we would do something that normally we would not do because we might be ashamed or worry about what people think of us. Now, we don't do anything illegal or immoral or anything that's going to get us thrown in jail, or that we would lose, that we would lose our job over, or that we would lose all our friends and cause divorces and all those kinds of things. Let me give an example. When I was fellow at the Albert Ellis Institute, we were on the corner. There would be these little kind of grocery stores that would serve food, and I went in, and they have these big plastic containers, and you put the food that you want from the buffet, hot food and cold food, and then you take it up, they weigh it, and then you pay and you go. Well, I went up, got the biggest container that I could, and I put one grape in it. And I would be normally ashamed to go up and ask them to weigh that, but I did it anyway, right? To try to realize it's not catastrophic. So I took it up, excuse me, and they weighed it. And then I said, I would like a knife and a fork with that, and did it. And what I thought would be a horrible thing and have them say, get the blank out of my store, it didn't happen. Maybe because it was New York, but I was able to go on. And then I realized it wasn't, the dreaded outcome did not happen. Or sometimes on the subway, people will yell out the stops, 42nd Street, Times Square, whatever, right? And normally we wouldn't do things like that. And it helps us to overcome that anxiety and that shame. One of the other things that I want to cover before we open up with questions, comments, or anything like that is, how does REBT differ from other models? Wow, this is an entire lecture in itself. And so one of the things that I would say that differs, and I'm talking, when I'm REBT, but I'm also talking about other second wave behavioral models and the third wave behavioral models. We share more than we differ. The other model, second wave model, REBT was the first of these second wave models, and CBT followed shortly thereafter. And in third wave models, dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, all great models, all wonderful models. And all of them differ from earlier models, such as, let's just look at psychoanalytic or psychodynamic. In psychoanalytic psychodynamic, there's they would tend to explore the activating event, much more, and particularly early childhood kinds of things they might do. Attachment theory would do a similar kind of thing. Again, all good models. I'm not criticizing any of these models. The way they go about treatment is different. So attachment maybe, and psychoanalytic psychodynamic may spend a good amount of time dwelling in the past. REBT does not ignore the past, of course not. But what we also tend to hold is that much of the past is contained in our present cognitions, our present inferences and beliefs. We learned them in childhood. We carry those into our present cognitive life, and also our behaviors. We learned behaviors. Maybe if we learned in a particular family setting that it was really important to kind of avoid speaking too much because we could get into trouble or punished or something like that. So we form those cognitions and those beliefs in the past, but we would say those are present right now. And so that they give us access to the past. And sometimes we find that if we help change those beliefs and behaviors in the present that we're focusing on, in the events that come up, and again, psychodynamic, psychoanalytic don't ignore those. They would, or any of the related and object relations theory and those kinds of self-psychology, they would say that, that we may be doing transference that relives those early patterns of relationships in the past. Okay, we just approach it in a different way. So we're much more present centered. And again, psychoanalytic psychodynamic does it by what happens within the session itself, right? And they can analyze the transference and countertransference. Um, one of the major differences is also that REBT is an active model. It's not very passive. We don't just listen to the client come in and just tell their story. We actively want to work with the client to identify those events that they're going through, the details of those events that are relative to the beliefs that they held, because those events will trigger those beliefs, and those beliefs will then have a direct relationship with the emotions and behaviors. Okay, so we work with the client to do that. Sometimes I tell my clients in orienting them to the model, please, if I interrupt you, and I will try to do this as politely as possible, if I interrupt you, it's because you just said something that is really a gold nugget, and I want to learn from you. I want to learn about the significance of what you just said, okay? And I never have any trouble with individuals like that. Now, if you're interrupting them all the time, that's not great, but we want to collaborate. And I'm very curious about when they describe an event, I'm very curious about their beliefs and the emotions and behaviors that they're going through. And they are the experts on what they're going through, okay? I may have a model that can help them navigate that, but they're the experts on that. So you will hear people say that we push in RBT, we push clients and feed them what they need to believe. We're not doing that. We're active, but we are collaborative. We believe very, very strongly that we need to collaborate with our clients so that this relationship is give and take. Some people say that we're more of a coach than anything else. I'm fine with that if they mean by that we're highly, highly collaborative. The other thing is that we do give a good amount of homework. Although I kind of like what Lisa Najavitz, kind of the creator of Seeking Safety, says. She calls them commitments, and I like that. The commitments, we make a commitment with a client, and they commit to do some homework, but that we have collaborated on. I don't just assign them homework. We collaborate and create the homework so that we can work together. Excuse me. And so it's that. The other thing that I want to bring up is many of you have studied common factors, and I'm very, very interested in common factors. And when some of the founders of that common factors research found that when they looked at REBT, that many of the common factors are right within the model, and so we would hope that would be that would be the case. And so I have my students brush up on common factors, but show how they can use the techniques within REBT so that they can be really, really helpful with the clients. Another thing about homework. In homework, we tend to focus on behavioral homework. It doesn't mean that we don't focus on cognitive restructuring, but often we will do the cognitive restructuring in session. They may do it outside of session, of course, but we really want them to engage in behavior because doing cognitive restructuring is helpful. Changing behaviors will help change the beliefs and change the emotions because they're all interconnected. Albert Ellis said that not to think about this as a linear process, A, then B, then C. Sometimes we change our behaviors, and when we change our behaviors, we change our emotions, okay, and our thoughts. So there are many more similarities and differences. Those are some of the major differences there. Before I move on, one of the major differences is that we look at emotions as qualitatively different rather than quantitatively different. What do we mean by that? When we do like an intake and we're talking with the client about what do they want to change, let's say they're anxious, and we will, what goal do you want there with respect to that anxiety? They say, I want to dial down that anxiety. I want to lower the intensity of the anxiety. That tends not to be the way that REBT progresses. We're not against that. And early on, we may want to, address that intensity, but that is not the ultimate goal. The goal would not be to lower the intensity, but to change the emotion. Because if we change the emotion, then the cognitions are different. If we just want to lower the intensity, right, then we haven't gotten at the beliefs that cause the anxiety in the first place, okay? So they're still there. And in a situation that may be similar to a negative one that they had before, they may be right back up to the dysfunctional behaviors and emotions. So what we want to do is get at the bottom of that and not just lower the intensity. Okay. Do we want to lower the frequency? Of course, we want if they're having arguments because they're really angry and they're being demanding, then of course we want to change that frequency of that and the duration. We look at that, but we want to do that by actually replacing those cognitions and changing those emotions. Okay, happy to discuss that any more that you would like. Okay, that's kind of my short presentation just to give you a feel for what REBT is like. And if you have any questions, feel free to make comments, and then I would be more than happy to address those. Okay. I did have three questions that people sent me, so I will go through those three questions. One question, and this gets at a common misbelief about REBT, and that is that we are just argumentative, that we're arguing against what a client believes. We're not argumentative. We might help, our goal would be to help them develop the skills whereby they can challenge those beliefs and say, these aren't helping me right now. And then get curious about the ways in which they aren't helpful. That may help motivate then to change those. Because a lot of times we may have anxiety but we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to change it. Or same thing with anger. We go, that's just the way I am. Well, it's not just the way we are. It is because we have habits that we've held on to over time and reinforced them over time. Habits of belief, habits of action. And so we can work with them to change it, but we don't argue them into it. We teach them how to challenge those beliefs and replace them so they better attain their desired life goals, whatever those life goals are. Maybe personal goals, or maybe educational goals, or maybe professional goals and occupational goals, or interpersonal goals, right? So we that's a misnomer. We're not argumentative. If someone does that, that would not be good REBT. The other one another question is, if we kind of help clients unconditionally accept themselves, others, life in the world, are they not motivated to change? Maybe they think that we're saying that they're just perfect as they are. We're not saying that. We're saying that research tends to show that if we accept ourselves, if we accept others, and again, it's not saying that we like everything about them, ourselves or others, but if we accept, then we have more energy to pour into making changes of those things that we don't like. But if we don't accept it and we're just disturbing ourselves about it, then we're so caught up in that with the dysfunctional emotions and behaviors that we're not focusing on making the change. So once we say, okay, this is the way things are right now, I don't like all of it. This is the way that things are. This is my goal because I want to attain some short-term goal and long-term goal. Okay. But if we don't accept that this is the reality right now, then energy can be scattered and we don't really make much progress in making those changes in life that can help us better attain our goals, whatever those goals are in life. So unconditional acceptance is not saying I'm good just the way I am. We're not evaluating goodness and badness of the self, right? We just find that a waste of time. But if we accept that, then okay, now let's move beyond on the things that we want to change. Okay, so that's a better way to think about unconditional self-acceptance. And we may need to work with the clients maybe repeatedly to help them see the difference between unconditional acceptance and saying, I'm good just the way I am and I don't need to change. Again, we don't evaluate goodness and badness of the self. We accept it. Okay. And then work on the goals, the roles that you have in life. And within the roles that you have, then what are the goals within that life? What are the values that are built into that life? And how can we change our thoughts and our behaviors so that we better attain those goals based upon our values? Okay. That's a whole lecture in and of itself. We don't have time for that today. And then the last one is venting. Many clients, many individuals think that what therapy should be about. In fact, I've had clients say, I just want to come in here so that I can vent. One of the problems with venting is that sometimes we feel, after we vent, we feel temporarily good, right? Temporarily better, but we don't get better over the long haul. And we probably get better over the long haul if we change those cognitions that are not helpful. We change some behaviors and we change the emotions. Look, when we say that we change them, that doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be anxious at times. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be angry or we're not going to experience shame and jealousy at times. But over time, we want the frequency of that to go down so that we are better, as I said, better able to attain our desired life goals, and we enjoy life more, and we enjoy our relationships with others and our relationship with the self, etc. So I guess the long-term goal within REBT is not just help people feel better, but help people get better over the long haul. I have often, years ago, I had a therapist, a lovely person, and they would just have me vent, and I went, okay, I feel good. But the same event comes back that's similar, and I'm right back where I was. I'm not making much change, but I'm feeling better in the moment. And so finally, when I began to use REBT and CBT, then I was better able to make more long-term goals and experience more meaning and purpose and more happiness in life. Not happy all the time, of course. That would be very normal, but at least in general, being more effective in getting done what I want to get done and feeling better. That is the questions that people brought up with me. Let me just check. Yeah. Thank you. I had one comment. Okay, I'm just going to read this. Currently appreciate your info currently in a curriculum for living in balance regarding attitudes and beliefs in a residential treatment facility. Oh, okay. And they're doing the work in that. I love that. And I think what I like about this is helping to live in balance with attitudes and beliefs in residential treatment. By the way, I'm out of town right now doing similar kinds of work and similar kinds of research. I'm really excited about hearing that. And I think REBT, being a short-term model, is a great model for doing that, to help people form attitudes that help them live the lives that they would like to live, but not only attitudinally, but in terms of beliefs and behaviors, right? What are healthy behaviors? What are the cognitions that support those and the attitudes for those, the inferences, the meanings that you form? It's all wonderful, and it's really helpful, particularly in recovery settings. Right now, I'm working in a recovery setting, doing research, but also looking at how REBT can be quite helpful. CBT and REBT can be quite helpful in that process. And that's the other thing that Albert Ellis, I'm so excited about this question. One thing that Albert Ellis noted was that REBT can be used in collaboration with other models. One of the last books that he wrote in collaboration with Catherine McLaren, excellent little book, very small and gets right to the point. I'm not great with remembering titles of books. I always have to look them up. But it's the only book I know that Albert Ellis wrote in collaboration with Catherine McLaren. And so he showed how we can work in collaboration with other models. So for example, in recovery facilities, I often will use seeking safety, which is a present-centered kind of therapy that helps regulate individuals with PTSD and substance use disorder. When we know that in residential treatment of individuals with substance use disorder, that about 90 to 95% have trauma. And so REBT can be very helpful for trauma. I like to begin with a present-centered therapy, so I can use seeking safety, and then for individual, use REBT, or you can use that in a group, and then, connect it with another model, motivational interviewing, trans-theoretical model, or even narrative exposure model, and have them do grounding across. So I think what I love about REBT is it's so flexible and can be adaptive to settings like a recovery setting in which we have multiple models that work really, really well together. And that's my research. I'm looking at how 3 different models, including REBT, can really help get the goals that we want in those recovery settings. So thank you very much for that question. Anyone else with any questions whatsoever about anything that has to do with REBT? If I don't know it, I will say I don't know it, but I will look it up, and then I will post it on YouTube, okay? I don't see anything now, but one thing is, if you haven't been on my YouTube channel much, Psychotherapy Education and Training, you know that I have maybe 300 and some recordings. Some of my old ones are kind of rough in terms of what's going on, and the look of them, but you can get all kinds of things that we cover. Some of them are how to integrate different models. Some is how we do we use REBT for grief? How do we use it for anxiety, for depression, for trauma, for substance use disorder? All of those kinds of things. So most of those are free. If you want deeper kinds of things, I try to have a monthly open session for members of my channel, and it's really easy. Just watch a video and you click on, and you can become a member of the channel. And then I give handouts for use with clients, etc. So it's a fun thing, and they support me in generating that. One thing that some of you will notice is that I have used, I write out my script sometimes, and I create short videos through HeyGen. And some people said, it looks like you, but it looks like you're much younger version. Well, because they cloned my face and they cloned my voice, I write out the script, and then I can correct the script, and it goes smoother. So I do that. It's not all of them. But the other thing that I'm announcing is that I'm going to be giving certificate training in REBT and specialized forms of REBT. Those individuals who have joined the channel will get that for free. Others would need to pay a little bit to get that kind of certificate bearing training. Okay. If nothing else, I do want to thank you and wish you all a really good day. And thank you for listening and for sharing. If you want to get a hold of me, especially if you're a member, it's easy to do. I send member posts, and so you can always respond that way. If you have some suggestions for topics that you want me to cover, feel free. Otherwise, thank you all and have a great day. Bye-bye.